There's an exchange in Autobiography of a Yogi between Master and his guru, Sri Keshwar. And Master has been meditating deeply and profoundly for a very long time. Of course, these are all sort of stories laid upon a deeper truth. Master Yogananda said to Swami Kriyananda that when I see from my infinite freedom in the spirit, however that actually manifests, Master said, when I see the personality I have to assume, when I come and take visible form, in the Bhagavad Gita it says, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I, the infinite spirit, take visible form in order to restore virtue and to destroy adharma, that which is false. So in some mysterious way that is definitely beyond my comprehension, the Master lives without a body in the freedom of the infinite, and then is called to come back to this world. And Master said, when I see the personality I have to assume, he said at first it feels very uncomfortable, like a heavy overcoat on a hot day. Imagine having the freedom to see that which we call ourselves is just like a heavy overcoat that I put on. And for a while it's uncomfortable, but then I get used to it. We are way beyond my pay grade, but it's amazing just even to contemplate it. So Master played what you call the lila. Lila is a wonderful Sanskrit word which means the play of God, which is also just, in English that word play has multiple meanings because the play of God is also the stage production with the script acted out in front of the backdrop and all of us playing our parts. And of course, very good actors become completely lost in the part they're playing, but also some actors become unbalanced because they become so completely lost in the parts that they play that they lose track of where they belong. On this very dais once, years ago when our K through 8 school was smaller and we didn't have as many older children, we used to put a lot of adults on the stage with the children. It was actually very good for the productions because the adult actors could play the parts, and it forced the children to a more in-depth experience of it. But of course, the parents actually preferred to see their children. They're odd that way. And especially as we started getting older children, all of us got knocked off the stage. One year, this is a riff on a riff. I think we were doing a play about St. Francis, and we had St. Clare as the narrator to hold the story together, and as that happened, I played that part. And this was before I was a Nayaswami, because that didn't exist at that point. I borrowed from Maggie at Ananda Village, who has an amazing costume shop. I borrowed this whole nun's costume. It was sort of this dove gray thing, and with a little face and the whole thing like this. And I was back there, and I put the whole thing on, and there it was. And finally, I'm looking like this with this whole garb. And I looked in the mirror, the thoughts that come to you, and I thought, this is the look. This is what I've been trying to achieve my whole life. Once you factor in incarnation, you can understand it. It gave a few other people the heebie-jeebies because I believe I was the mother superior of some of you poor girls at different times. And I was a little harsh on some of you. I've had to apologize in kind of a global way, and I'm offering it now too. People will come to me and tell me they have kind of a conflicted relationship with me. And I say, well, I'm so sorry. We've all learned, we're all better now. But going back to the play that was here, it was about Jesus. And we, in the Bible, the Bible is kind of silent. Joseph is there, and then Joseph just vaporizes, and we never hear about him again. So we just added in a little more drama, and we had Joseph die. Just because, this is a children's play, and they need a little more continuity. And I don't know, it seemed like a good idea. And at that time, this wonderful man, who's still a wonderful man, Matthew, was part of our school staff, and he was a professionally trained actor. he was from England, and he was really good. He played Jesus in that play. We actually had him drag a cross up the aisle. I don't know what we're thinking sometimes. He actually had a heavy cross on his back, and he was a big man. He dragged it up the aisle, and Aryavan, Gary McSweeney's son, who was a child in the school, played the devil and got to he jumped on the cross while, Matthew. So this is a children's play. Some of these children are 4 and 5 years old. Anyway, they're there. And then we had Joseph die, and Gary McSweeney played Joseph, and Joseph was just laid out on a table here, really dead. And I had to be Mary. I had the part of Mary at that point. And I, was not wanting to leave my husband at that. It was, naturally, you can imagine. It was the most exquisite experience of acting that I've ever had, because the way it was going to be was that Jesus, who was Matthew, was just going to come and take his mother away, which was a very realistic thing to do. Because I knew that Matthew was so good, he was so good, I didn't have to think about what was going to happen. I just went into the part. My husband had died. I didn't want to leave him. And I just waited till Matthew literally picked me up and moved me away like that. I mean, it's so, like, our lives are made of these extraordinary moments, aren't they? When just somehow something happens and we just step outside of the world that we're living. When I was standing there in front of the mirror in that nun's costume, it's like just some kind of vibration of dedication to God broke through all the forms, and I was just living in that. When I was standing here, and I can still feel it, when I felt Matthew come behind me and take me away, it's like time, space, the fact that there was an audience, none of that existed. We were just in something intensely real. And this is what our life is all about. Many, many years ago, would have been in the early 70s, when I was living at Ananda village, and Swami Kriyananda's house, which is now Crystal Hermitage, was entirely that one dome that is now the living room for those of you who know it. He had a generator for when he was working with his with his typewriter. But otherwise, it was no electricity. We had gas lights. So when we had satsangs in that house, there was gas. It was gas lit. So there was shadow, a lot of shadow, and there would just be a little bit of light, little arenas over Swami when he was speaking. And the big windows there, I don't think it might have been winter, because winter was even more isolated. And he gave a satsang. I have no idea what the context was, but it was, he had some kind of a bhav. He was in a spiritual mood that just took all of us with him. And in those days, we lived so isolated. We lived out in that place which is remote anyway. The roads weren't paved. We didn't have any, our lives were on that property just all the time. No internet, it hadn't even been dreamed of. No telephones, no television, nothing. So we had just a completely self-created world, which is what was necessary, because Swamiji had to mold us into something that we had never imagined, which was devotees dedicated to Master's work. He could see all that was coming, but we couldn't. And we were there with him, and he gave a satsang, and how many lifetimes have I sat at the feet of this teacher and just listened to him. And at the end of it, he said, when divine realization comes, when that moment of liberation comes, he said, in that moment, he said, you see all of your incarnations. They're just all, you see it all. Again, I can say those words, but I can hardly even imagine what that would be. I mean, I put on a nun's costume, and there was a little moment, but nonetheless, see them all. And you see them all, he said, and what you realize, he said, is that it was all just a dream, that it was all just God, the waves of the divine just playing through you, and this I, which we hold so precious, and to which we relate everything. He said, we see that it was never really there. It was just the energy of the divine. And then he said, however, he said, every single time in any incarnation, when you have actually touched into the divine presence, in other words, when you have stepped out of the dream and stepped into the divine power behind the dream, he said, every time that has happened in whatever context, he said, those look like pearls on a string through all of those incarnations. This really happened. This really happened. And you'll see all those, as that's what your whole incarnation was. Just from pearl, all your incarnations, from pearl to pearl to pearl to pearl. And of course, sitting there with Swamiji, I certainly thought, oh, I'll remember this one. Yeah, this one really happened. This is the time when we stepped outside. So our discussion for today is, can God be seen? And then Saranya read this beautiful whisper, one of Master's poetic prayers about the lights and the this and the this and all of that. And that is one way to sort of answer the question. But I'm going to go back, having not actually forgotten, even though it was a long time ago, when I mentioned that Master had this interaction with Sri Keshwar. And he'd been meditating for a long time, and he said to his guru, when will I find God? And Sri Keshwar laughs with him, with him, and says, what are you expecting? A man with a long white beard sitting on a cloud? You have realized God. Now, I started out to explain this as a lila. This is a play within a play. But just as I was there in that one moment of the only reality in that moment was what I was doing, but of course parts of me also knew that I was in a costume on a stage, but all of it was not relevant to the moment. So I'd given myself entirely into that moment. This is how subtle it is. So Master, when he puts on that hot overcoat to be Paramhansa Yogananda, then he commits himself to it. This is who I have to be. And when Swamiji even asked him, he said, what does it feel like, in essence, is what Swami asked Master. He said, inwardly you are always free. That's how he put it. Somehow, even though you're committed to this story, inwardly you're always free. So when that freedom becomes the relevant issue, then it's there. You can just go back to it. When the commitment to the play, to the lila, is the relevant issue, then I give myself entirely to it, with the same freedom. So I was just kind of contemplating all of this. I didn't know what Saranya was going to read, with this extremely poetic visual image. Oh, now I've seen God, because the stars are bursting and the fields are turning into light, and I'm all for it if that's what wants to happen. But we shouldn't get confused, because as Master also put it, in a very non-poetic way, the only place that God can be experienced is in the human nervous system, which is about as unpoetic a phrase as I've ever heard. Human nervous system. What rhymes with human nervous system? But it's like he goes in every direction, because this is the Leela. All of these things are true. And the way that God most often manifests to us, or most easily manifests to us, is when, the way I can say it, is when we watch the miracle of our own transformation. And sometimes, for some people, it can come in dramatic visions and so on, but that's not the common way, despite Master's glorious language. That's not the common way on the path of Kriya Yoga. Swami Kriyananda actually spoke of it once because Sri Ramakrishna, who was a great avatar of the 1800s, late 1800s in India, who lived outside of Calcutta, right where Master was born, he passed away just at the time that Master was born. So their lives never crossed, but a couple of the chapters, several of the chapters in Autobiography of a Yogi are related to Ramakrishna. Master Mahashaya, the blissful devotee, was a disciple of Ramakrishna, and Master Mahashaya took Yogananda out to the place where Sri Ramakrishna had lived. The vision of the blissful mother of the stone image coming to life, that was all related to Ramakrishna. So there was a very close association between them. And in Ramakrishna's life, the disciples around him had lots of very dramatic experiences. It was happening all the time, like this. And Swami sort of said, how come not us? Because Master Yogananda and Sri Ramakrishna were both avatars of the same, and the devotees were of the same quality, all of that. But Master says our path is different, basically. Our path is because of Kriya Yoga, because of the times we live in, who knows? The Masters all come from the same level of consciousness to teach the same essential truth. But as soon as they put on that hot overcoat, and as soon as they take a particular body that puts them in a particular time frame and in a particular culture, what they can say of the infinite that they have becomes defined by the culture into which they've been born, and also to the needs of their disciples. Isn't that interesting? Because you see, they don't come like, I have a message. Excuse me a moment. They don't come like an artist or a songwriter that says, I have a message I need to give, anything like that. When P.G. Wodehouse, the great English humorist that Swami enjoyed so much, he was asked once, what is your message to humanity? And he said, I don't have one. When I die, he said, humanity will be one message short. That's how he put it. So the Masters don't come with any message. They come to help us, and that's the only reason they come. Just like that. So they will only do that which is helpful. When Jesus came, he could have talked about Divine Mother. He could have said all kinds of things that Master has said, but it wouldn't have served. So he talked about Heavenly Father. That was just what he talked about. And it wasn't because he didn't understand the Mother. He talked about the Comforter. Can you think of a better word for mother than the Comforter? But he was limited by his time. Yogananda came and he spoke according to his time. But he said also, it's not for our path. It's not for this age, in this time, that in this culture, especially the Western culture, that this is all these going into ecstasies and things are going to happen. Darn, but that's just kind of what we're dealt with. But what we have is the opportunity for permanent, eternal self-transformation. That just step by step by step, we achieve what we aspire to become. And we don't even know how it happens. And it rarely happens that it's just overnight. When I first came on the path and first started learning about these teachings in, 1967 or 1966, about that time when it was all really, 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 really new. Somewhere I read somewhere that there's 3 ways that you can achieve enlightenment. One is gradually over time, or just through deep meditation and so on. What would be the second? One can be at death, and one can be in your sleep, that you'll just suddenly wake up enlightened. And I voted for that one. That seemed like the best one to me. I'll just go to sleep today and I'll wake up a free soul. Isn't that a good idea? If it's just one of the options, why not? In the same context, my friend who used to use sleep, his sleep was his favorite drug. He just had the capacity to sleep an amazing amount whenever life was too much for him. At that time, he was in graduate school, and he eventually quit. But while he was in graduate school, he could sleep all day and all night, because otherwise he would have to do his work. But so he said, when we all were talking about well, there's 3 levels of consciousness: subconscious, conscious, and superconscious, and he had mastered one. So it was 1/3 of the way there. Isn't that marvelous? But that's not how it works. How it works is that strangely, and it is a little bit like you fall asleep and you wake up the next day, you just begin to notice that you're entirely different. And one begins to notice what that difference is. And it's so odd, is that there is less of me to think about whether I'm different or not. Does that make sense? We tend to think that self-realization is I get it right. And again, way back in the frontier days of all of this, there was a magazine then called Yoga Journal. I don't know if it still exists in some online form, but it was a big part of the world in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And there was an article in there called "The Dark Side of Meditation," which is like the dark side of meditation. It turned out to actually be quite a good article, because it was about the fact that highly stressed, type A people who are driven to success often turn to meditation, usually first because they're driving themselves crazy with their type A energy. And before, their goal was merely to be rich or to be a CEO. Now their goal is divine perfection. So you can really make yourself stressed and nervous. That was the dark side of meditation. I'm supposed to realize God, rats, I didn't do it again, And I've actually seen that play itself out. I kept the article for a long time because it amused me so much, but there it is. And so we think that self-perfection looks like the I that I'm comfortable with, the personality, the me, the way I think, even sometimes the context of my life, but certainly the entity that I think is myself. I keep having to rearrange it so it'll behave properly. And, it doesn't. It's exactly as Swami described when you're trying to wash a shirt in a sink. And this corner's poking up, so you push it down, then it pops up over here, and then you push it down. Swamiji described that when his efforts to change himself before he became a disciple, he just realized that I just don't have access to whatever is needed that will really make me different. And then he met Yogananda, then he became a disciple, then he discovered attunement with the vibration that he's trying to become. And then gradually what happens is the I that we think of ourselves gradually diminishes as a percentage of self-definition, and attunement becomes the definition. Thoughts are not universal there, and thoughts are not individual. They're universal. This is what Yogananda says in Autobiography. We do not create the reality that we perceive. We do not create our consciousness. We merely choose what consciousness we're going to be part of. And so the more we choose to be part of that divine consciousness, and the more we persevere, that's unfortunately the really important word in this, the more we persevere and are not deterred or discouraged, or certainly not, we certainly don't quit merely because I've gone to sleep and I haven't woken up enlightened, day after weary day, that we just have to keep trying to attune ourselves. And gradually we become that attunement. That's the only way I can say it. And we're still ourselves. We're still, as Swami Kriyananda said so vividly, I never identify with Swami Kriyananda. Kriyananda is an event for which I am responsible. And the master, the masterfulness of that articulation is, if you're responsible for an event, you have to really commit yourself to it. You can't just casually say, oh, well, maybe there'll be refreshments. Maybe somehow the refreshments will manifest. Maybe the chairs will get moved. You have to decide how it's really going to happen. You have to have a vision, and you have to put out whatever energy is needed. I remember one Christmas in the very, very beginning of this place, and we'd just been really super busy, and there was like a 2-hour window before the next event, and just as I was lying down to just take a little rest in that 2-hour window, this was when our staff was very small, and suddenly, just as I was falling asleep, I realized that no one was taking care of preparing the room for the next event. Boom, that was it. Up you got, because this is an event for which we're responsible, and instead of sleeping for 2 hours, we made the room ready, which was a lot. It turned out to be a lot of work, but who cares? This is the event. But there's just a flow of energy. And what is the divine except that self-giving energy? What are we trying to become? When we say we want to be, an instrument, or we want to be one with God, what is the definition of God? We tend to think of it as, well, somebody who gets to just sit there and just watch the whole show. But then the Gita tells us everything that's happening, that's the divine. I, the infinite spirit. That's what the Gita says to us today. It's not that I'm in you, it's that you are in me. And then we're actually, you see, it's not self-perfection. It's absolute self-forgetfulness. That's all. It's like there is no I to care anymore. It's just, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And then we just do it. And the channel is blessed by that which flows through it. We just feel it flowing. Yesterday afternoon, some of you were also at Ananda village. Jyotish, who is Swami Kriyananda's spiritual successor and has been in that role for a decade, more than a decade now, and was serving in that way for decades before, in that Swami relied on him completely. It was his 80th birthday, so there was an 80th birthday celebration at the village. It was very simple in certain ways, and that was a very wise decision. Just some tents so that we wouldn't be in the hot sun, beautiful music. But what it was, well, you see, our determination is tested. And that's what we just have to understand. This is, again, one of those weird things that I can say. We've been fickle for a long time. Our relationship with God is like, we can understand it from a human relationship. If somebody says they love you and doesn't really behave like they love you, even though they say, oh yes, I love you, but they're fickle. They're going off here, they're going off there, they're not there when you really need them, they don't seem to understand. You may hear what they say, but if they come back and they say, no, this time I really mean it, you say, oh, is that so? And you may be perfectly open to that possibility. You may be even optimistic about that possibility. But you want to see it in action. And somehow that's the karma we accrue. Even if we may have had this desire for the bliss of God, the Divine Mother says, really? Okay, let's see. I'm going to put a few obstacles in your way. I'm going to test and see how deep is your commitment. But if we persevere, many times I've been asked, because I speak a lot, what is the secret of success on the spiritual path? 2 words in English: don't quit. That's all. It's remarkably simple. You don't even have to be any good at it. Just don't quit. And being there, so Jyotish is now 80. I'm not far behind him. I'm pushing 80, but from a little distance, but that's the number I'm pushing. A lot of us are pushing that number. And what we can do, and what I looked at, not everybody in the field where we were in the garden is pushing 80. Everybody's pushing 80, but some are from a far distance. There was a baby less than a month old, so she's really hardly got it going, but she's pushing 80 too, just like everyone else. But what you could feel in that room was tested love. And tested love, that's real love. You could feel that. And that was a pearl. That was a pearl on the string of our lives. And let us then seek to add more and more and more. Bless you.